After the tone, please state your name followed by the pound sign.
Your line has been muted.
Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and I have my coworker Nicole here. Let her introduce herself.
Good afternoon. Nicole Sandberg. I'm the Non-Polluting Source Implementation Coordinator Grant Manager for Virginia.
And so,
Ashley and Nicole, do you guys mind speaking up a little bit?
Sure. We'll get closer to the phone.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
So today we're going to be talking about TMDL Implementation Planning in Virginia. So first, I wanted to start by just showing everybody our whole planning process for impaired waters in Virginia. So first, we begin with assessment, where we use our water quality monitoring data to identify those water bodies that are impaired. So similar to other states, in that a lot of times resources are not as expansive enough for us to monitor every water body in the state, we are able to select a few and monitor those on a rotational basis. And therefore, when we use that data, we're able to identify whether those water bodies are meeting standards and their designated uses. If they are not meeting the standards or the designated uses, they go on our 303D list or bad waters list. And so therefore, you begin that overall cycle. Those impaired water bodies are then prioritized for TMDL development, which determines the load allocations and pollutant reductions necessary to improving water quality. Once that TMDL is completed, it follows the process to the TMDL Implementation Plan development. And once that implementation plan development is complete, you can move into full on-the-ground implementation. And then finally, go back, Nicole. We'll wrap up the entire process with continued monitoring, which typically is used for evaluating interim progress and success towards restoring the water quality. This map shows all of the TMDLs that Virginia has completed as of October 2016. There's over 1,000 TMDLs completed, and of those, 700 address bacteria impairment. So you can see by the, a little hard to see, but the tan shading is all of the bacteria TMDLs. So you can see that comprises most of the priorities that, or the impairments that are being addressed. Secondary to that, the highest number of impairments addressed are sediment and nutrients. So we assess the TMDLs that have been developed, which kind of have their own prioritization process, and then we determine which of those to prioritize for implementation plan development. We have a ranking process that was done several years back for ranking our potential implementation plan development, and we've been working through that for going down our list of creating our implementation plans. We are actually evaluating how we perform this process and are going to be changing it to match it to be a little bit more similar to the 303D vision process that began in 2013. And it will consist of a list of various ranking criteria, and one that I kind of wanted to point out was the willingness of stakeholders to participate, and therefore hopefully implementation on the ground having a higher success rate. So that is going to be one of the main drivers for ranking how we prioritize our implementation plan. So what is a TMDL implementation plan, at least as far as Virginia is concerned? It describes how pollution will be reduced to achieve a TMDL. There's actually 11 different components that we consider for an implementation plan, but generally they include the types and numbers of BMPs to be installed in the watershed. It lists various sources of funding that are needed to that are going to be used to install those BMPs, and then also talks about the various stakeholders that need to be involved in order to achieve that implementation. So the overall goal really is to provide a roadmap to restore water quality in the various impaired watersheds. In Virginia, at least, the implementation plan only addresses the load allocation or the non-point source pollution. The waste load allocation is addressed through permit conditions. And I also wanted to point out that we traditionally have done implementation plans following a TMDL being developed, but we are kind of looking more into the future of doing possibly more what EPA calls watershed-based planning, and which do not have to be preceded by a TMDL. So that's kind of looking into the future for us.
So in Virginia, we have been doing TMDL implementation planning since 2001. And unique to Virginia, we have a statewide regulation, the Virginia Water Quality Monitoring Information and Restoration Act. It was established in 1997, and it includes a requirement to direct the Department of Environmental Quality to list impaired waters and then develop watershed cleanup plans such as TMDL implementation plans, as TMDLs or TMDL alternatives. And then, and this is the unique part for Virginia, it actually requires us to develop implementation plans to implement those TMDLs. And I'm not aware of many states that actually have a state law that requires them to develop implementation plans. So in addition, in 1998 and in 1999, U.S. EPA was sued for related to TMDL development for Virginia, and as a result, a consent decree was developed for Virginia to develop TMDLs in the state, a pretty ambitious schedule through 2010. And the reason I mention that is that the number of TMDLs developed by the state was pretty substantial during that time, and due to our WQ MIRA, our number of implementation plans also increased because we have more TMDLs developed, we had more implementation plans developed. The other key component in Virginia as far as directing why we do implementation planning is through the Clean Water Act Section 319 program, which is the non-point program for the nation. And in 2000, the program doubled as far as the funding provided by as a national allocation, and to be able to address water quality impairment. And that additional funding, so at the time it was about $100 million, was directed to having it was required that you have an implementation plan addressing 9 key elements. And so as a result, Virginia established its implementation planning program in 2001. So since 2001, we have developed, well, this chart is through, this graphic through 2016, and we had developed 83 implementation plans. As of today, we've developed 88 implementation plans throughout Virginia, addressing over 400 impaired water segments. And I'm sorry, I'm going to cough, I apologize. We have most of our implementation plans in Virginia are probably addressing bacteria, single parameter. We do have some implementation plans that are addressing multiple impairments, so if you have a benthic and a bacteria impairment. But most of the time, most of them are dealing with bacteria. So we aren't going to address a lot in this presentation going from implementation planning to actual implementation. We'll touch on it a little bit, but once we have our implementation plans, we try to go into some type of implementation project, so to speak. And as of 2016, 58% of the plans that we had completed, so 58% of the 48 plans have had some type of implementation, some type of on-the-ground activity that we have been able to document throughout Virginia. And
so I also wanted to point out that while Virginia commonly uses this TMDL implementation plan to direct on-the-ground implementation process, all of our implementation plans are written to satisfy the EPA, what they term the 9 key elements, which are listed here. This is really important in that if you write a implementation plan or a watershed-based plan or some kind of alternative that meets these 9 key elements, it really opens the door for Clean Water Act 319 funding, because 50% of the funding that we receive through 319 has to go towards implementing accepted plans. So all of these elements that are listed here really point into the 6 steps that EPA has actually lined out for their watershed-based planning in their EPA handbook. The first 2 elements, identifying causes and sources and estimating load reduction expected, are really addressed through our TMDL process, while the rest of the key elements are really focused more into what is included into our implementation plan. So everything combined is referenced either via the TMDL and then therefore put into an implementation plan, overall satisfying the 9 key elements of for EPA. So implementation plan development really begins in Virginia with gaining support from the local stakeholders. It's even one of the criteria, I think, as I mentioned earlier, for ranking our implementation plan watersheds. So even though the IP development process is led by the Department of Environmental Quality here, it's really done in partnership with watershed stakeholders. This is really important from both the plan development and the on-the-ground implementation perspective, because without involved stakeholders, you really are not going to be able to achieve water quality success. So I wanted to kind of lay out how we go through our development and how we incorporate stakeholder participation. So once a development project begins, we typically hold a public meeting to kick off the process, where they talk about the watershed issues and strategy for moving forward. They also will form a steering committee, which will have a whole assortment of participants. Typically, those members include soil and water conservation districts, county planning staff, local watershed groups, planning district commissions, and many others, kind of dependent on the watershed itself. They'll hold several steering committee meetings over the course of the development of the implementation plan, as well as what we call working groups. The 3 that are listed here, the agriculture, residential, and government, are the 3 most common working groups, but that can really be determined by the stakeholders. If they feel that there's another kind of interest group, that they can come up with their own working group title. Where in the working group meetings, they break down very specifically the issues that pertain to each group, and then that information is fed back to the steering committee that basically is kind of the decision-making body for the strategies that go into the implementation plan. So I wanted to highlight also that in 2003, a guidance manual for TMDL implementation plans was created to provide guidance for these entities, such as soil and water conservation districts, et cetera, that develop our implementation plans for Virginia. We recently updated it earlier this year, and it is currently posted to our website. Sorry, that's a kind of crazy link, but if you go to our homepage, odeq.virginia.gov, and you go to the water section, or you go to the search, you can easily find the IP guidance manual. And it really lays out section by section of what components should be included in an implementation plan and really how to go about writing an effective plan. Part of that is that we also try to integrate our plans here in Virginia with other regional or statewide efforts, such as the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Implementation Plan, other watershed groups, and local roundtables, or local comprehensive plans. So we try our best to make sure that we are incorporating other efforts that are ongoing as well. So like we said earlier, we're going to kind of go over, use the Sum, Deep, Carter, and Great Runs implementation plan as an example, but we're also going to be intermixing some of the overall general themes that run across most of our implementation plans as we go through this example. So hopefully you'll be able to see kind of from top to bottom what's included in our implementation plan and what type of results that we've been able to achieve through some of our implementation planning efforts. So just a little background on this particular implementation plan that we chose to present to you guys today. And the main reason why we chose this one is because it's one of the implementation plans that we've been able to demonstrate an actual success story to EPA. So we have been able to show that there is a trend towards improving water quality. So just a little background on the watershed itself. Sum Run, Carter Run, Great Run, and Deep Run, as you can see in the picture, are 4 separate different watersheds, sub-watersheds, located in Northern Virginia area, Coquille and Stafford counties. They are approximately anywhere between 17,000 to over 35,000 acres in size, and primarily the land uses there are forest and agriculture, but a small amount of residential, from anywhere from 2 to 3% on average for each one of those sub-watersheds. So a little more background on this implementation plan. It was originally, Deep Run was placed on the 1996 303D list based on violations of fecal coliform bacteria water quality standard, while the other 3 watersheds were placed on the 1998 303D list. So there's over 97 miles of perennial streams that actually were listed as impaired. After these listings, bacteria TMDL studies were developed for each one of the impairments in 2005. So there was actually a TMDL, 4 different TMDLs done, one for each one of the runs. And during that TMDL development process, they actually performed biological source tracking to help them determine some of the sources of pollution. So this talks about kind of summarizing what was put into, or what the TMDLs ended up telling us as far as the load reductions that needed to happen in order to meet the bacteria standard. So across all 4 of the TMDLs, it basically said we needed to exclude most, if not all, of the livestock from streams. We needed to have a substantial land-based non-point source load reduction on the pasture and cropland, which, as stated before, is over 70% of each one of those sub-watersheds, so quite a lot of land area. We needed to correct all the straight pipes and failing septic systems, while also maintaining those septic systems that are properly functioning. Reduce pet bacteria loads on residential land, as well as, if possible, reduce load reductions from wildlife.
So in Virginia, we do a our implementation plans are at a minimum a two-stage approach. And so basically we are addressing that first stage. Sometimes the first stage is split into two, so there'll be 3 stages. But for the most part, we have a two-stage approach. Addresses the largest impact to water quality. Kind of imagine some low-hanging fruit, the ones that are going to give us the largest bang for our buck. We also then will be able to show a level of implementation through those stages over time. And so generally the first stage is to address the single sample maximum criteria of 235 CFU. So basically in Virginia, we can't violate that standard more than 10.5% of the time, and so our stage 1 goal for most of our implementation plans is to meet that. So essentially, we could have a delisting if we have implemented everything and we meet that 10.5. Basically, we consider stage 1 is our delisting goal, and then stage 2 is to meet the not exceeding the geometric mean of 126. So essentially, meeting the TMDL would be the stage 2. And so having this incremental process, it allows us to show progress while at the same time using resources more effectively and efficiently. So this is an example. This is from the Carter and Great Run implementation plan. I'm sorry if it is a little hard to read, but basically we have it shows the 2 stages split. So and then each of the stages are also split by a milestone. So there are essentially, they say 11 milestones. So milestone 1 through 5 would complete stage 1, and so in milestone 6 we'll say hopefully you're going to meet all the targets to be able to delist. And then in milestone 7 through 10, you're going to do the activity needed to do the additional work to meet the TMDL, and then by milestone 11, you should meet and attain your TMDL. Our implementation plan has both water quality milestones and stage goals, as well as implementation BMPs, or what we call control measure goals. And so in this particular case, we have it split both for each of the watersheds as well as the entire implementation planning area. So in our implementation plan, we list the different, as I mentioned, the control measures, the BMPs, to determine that are necessary to meet whichever goal, whichever stage 1 or stage 2 goal. And the most common ones I already mentioned were pasture management, manure incorporation, livestock exclusion, pet waste riparian buffers. Go ahead. So as an example from Carter, this is from Sandberg, the Carter Great Run. This is collectively for both stage 1 and stage 2. So this would be what the goal would be for all of the entire IP. So if you're going to meet the TMDL, this is what would be required for that particular implementation plan. So all of our implementation plans have a prescriptive list like this. And generally, they also include it broken out by the different watersheds. So for example, this one has 4 watersheds. You would have 4 similar tables that would provide the breakdown by each of the watersheds as well. This particular one is combined together, so you have the overall requirement for the entire implementation plan. One of the reasons why we do our implementation plans the way we do is so that we are able to then show progress when we actually implement. So, for example, this is Carter Run. This is one of the 4 watersheds that are in the implementation plan. So this is 1 TMDL. And this is just stage 1, remember it's a 2-stage. And we have been doing implementation on this area for about 10 years. And so based on our goals, our control measure goals, we can, and based on what implementation information we have, we can assess what percentage of our implementation plan has been obtained, and it helps give us an indicator. Because sometimes we, as most of us will know, water quality monitoring data isn't as responsive, and so we may not see the changes in water quality data as quickly as we would expect as we're implementing DMPs. But once we start hitting most of the targets, we're at, exceeding the goal for over 100%, we can potentially look to see whether or not our water quality data is tracking that trend of meeting our control measure or BMP goals.
It can also allow you to be able to do what EPA terms adaptive management, to be able to, as you can see, several of these goals are way over the 100%. So maybe in the original implementation plan, it wasn't expected that certain BMPs would have such a success rate for implementation, so you can actually adjust those and kind of adapt as you go down the line. And like Nicole was saying, it's been implemented for 10 years now, so you kind of learn that as you go along. Your original goals may need to be adjusted as you go down in time.
Another component of our implementation plans is a schedule that breaks down the estimated costs, and this helps for future planning. And so through time, we've developed cost estimates for these BMPs as well as BMP pollution reduction efficiencies, and we're able to develop this this estimated cost of what the cost for the full implementation of this plan. So this is in this particular example, again, from the Concurrent Great Run, 4 watersheds, 4 TMDLs. To meet the full TMDL, it would be $53 million for implementation. To just meet the delisting goal, it would be $12 million. Now, one thing that I would like to do at some point is what's interesting is sometimes our plan doesn't necessarily show up in the final results, and so that's going to show, it's going to come to light when we look at the water quality data, and we might have to switch back to our implementation goals and our funding goals of how much we actually had completed and what was the true response to the water quality. Next slide. So this is a quick description of the Carter Run. Again, 1 of 4 watersheds, the 1/4 of an implementation plan. And over a 10-year period, we spent collectively $2.2 million of funding. And so theoretically, if you can switch back to the slide prior to that. So,
hey, Nicole, do you mind just speaking up a little bit?
Sorry, I apologize for that. So, so just in one watershed over 10 years, so 1/4 of this IP we've spent $2.2 million. And according to this plan, we should have spent theoretically, well, $53 million for the entire plan. So if you divide that by 4, you're at, I don't know, $15 or $16 million. And so it's just an indicator of what percentage of activity was actually completed, and theoretically then our water quality goals may track with that as well.
So one of the key elements that is necessary in the implementation plan is to put in there a monitoring plan. So the main reason for including this is because you need to be able to, once you reach the implementation portion, after you've developed your plan, you need to be able to measure what's actually going on, the responses that are happening to that implementation. on the ground. And I just wanted to know, I've circled in red the one station that's labeled CAE 000.25. That's going to come into play later on in another graphic. That's actually the very bottom of Carter Run that was being measured. So as you can see, there's 8 to 10 monitoring stations there, which is pretty common of a plan to be put into the implementation plan to hopefully then verify that interim progress as you're going forward with implementation.
The next few slides are showing some true water quality data for this particular implementation plan, specifically Carter Run. And just to give you an indication, so our goal over by 10 years, so 2016, our goal was to be at 0% violation rate. By 2011, our goal was to be at 10.5. So over 10 years, so as of 2000 the next graph will explain what I'm saying. Sorry. In the assessment cycle that happened 2011 to 2016, we were at 16% violation rate. So we have not met that 10.5 goal. So we haven't met theoretically the first phase of this implementation plan. Although we have met pretty much most of the BMP goals for phase 1, and we're hoping as we continue to monitor this particular site that water quality will continue to improve as those BMPs become more effective. As most of us may realize, you can put a BMP in, but it doesn't maintain its full efficiency until several years later as grass buffers grow up and other issues become more permanent.
So at the end of this long, well, can be long, development process for developing a implementation plan, you'll end up with, at least here in Virginia, 2 different versions of a report. We have a technical report that you can see on the left, and then a public document on the right. The real difference between the two is the technical report is what we submit to EPA for their 9-element consistency review. The public document is really meant to serve as a slightly easier, digestible version of the implementation plan for stakeholders to read. Both of these documents are posted on our website, but it's supposed to be a lot shorter and not have as much of the technical information in there. So that's why we do 2 different versions. And so for this particular example that we've been going through, it was actually finalized in May 2006. And so that kind of circling all the way back around, the reason why we really chose this example of an implementation plan was because we were able to demonstrate program success. What you see is just a snapshot, the very top portion of a non-point source success story. Basically, there are 3 different types?
3.
There's 3 different types of success stories that we as a state and a recipient of 319 funding can submit to EPA. And the Carter Run, we were able to submit as what they call a Type 2, which is a water quality improvement success story. So as you saw in that previous, I'm going to go back up. In the previous graphic here, we are not at that blue line, the 10% violation or exceedance rate standard, but we were able to demonstrate that, okay, as of X date, project start 2006, over time with implementation, we are trending towards water quality improvement, and so we were able to demonstrate that through our implementation efforts, we are trending towards restoration of that water body. So we were able to produce a success story. And you can actually find all of our success stories on our website as well as EPA Success Story website. So if you're more interested in reading the full article or any of the other success stories that we have, you can go to those websites. And I wanted to throw this in there because this graphic shows all of the success stories that Virginia has been able to produce since 2002. So you can see it's quite more than a handful. And so we're very proud of that fact that we've been able to use our implementation process to actually achieve water quality improvement.
And I think one of the reasons we're able to do that is our plans are so prescriptive that they allow us to show a progress in implementation planning when sometimes our water quality isn't showing it, and then sometimes we can show water quality improvements when we don't expect it because we're not meeting our implementation targets. So it gives us a two-pronged approach to addressing success. So one of the things you were asked when we were putting together this presentation is what things have we learned through the 15-plus years of implementation planning in Virginia that other states may find interesting or other states may also have the same issues, both the positive and negative. And so the biggest lesson is consistency amongst the development of the implementation plans. And what I'm mainly talking about is the final product can differ depending on what type of contractors we have. And so although we as DEQ lead the efforts, we often will contract out the modeling components or contract out the development of the production of the final plan with our input and with all the stakeholders, but that we are not necessarily writing the entire plan. And this consistency issue is really important in just the way some of the, for example, the staged tables that we showed you. We went through a statewide effort recently to move all our implementation plans into a online enterprise system to help us better have access to that information and do analysis on all of the implementation planning. And it's tied to our assessment program, our water quality monitoring program, and our TMDL. So it's kind of a one-stop shop. And as we were working to take 17 years of plans into a database, we realized that most of our plans were not consistent in the sense that we had these manuals that told us how we were supposed to develop these plans, but yet what contractor A may do a table that doesn't split out the control measures by every single watershed that might be addressed in that particular plan. So, for example, the implementation table that we showed for Carter, Thumb, and Deep Run, you'll notice that it didn't have the control measures broken out by Thumb, Carter, and Deep Run. At least in the plans themselves, those tables are available in the contractor documents, but they weren't available to the public. And so if someone in Carter Run wanted to know what their goals were versus Thumb Run, they weren't that information wasn't as readily available. And so in addition, since we're a large state, 60% of our state is covered by what we call the Chesapeake Bay, is influenced by the Chesapeake Bay, and then 40% of our state, the southern part, has a lot of mining issues, coal mining areas, as well as other issues. There is a lot of differences between that result, and our plans perhaps have had difficulty in addressing those differences and allowing us to compare some of those results statewide. So again, through this effort that we're doing through this enterprise system that we're developing, we've realized we're working to have more consistency so that someone who calls something an apple and someone else may be calling it an orange, we can still compare that information. This has to do with a lot of times when we have the prescriptions of the different types of control measures, the different types of BMPs. Everybody was calling things different things, and when it comes to trying to implement a program, it made that much more difficult. The other lesson we had was just the fact that we are leading these as a state agency and they're not always a local initiative. We've had a lot of interest by groups who want to do an implementation plan themselves, and we as a state have resisted that. They can partner with us in a group, but if our process is, say they want to work in the Goose Creek area, and we're not planning on working in the Goose Creek area for 2 years, well, we cannot provide them any support. And so I know there are a lot of states who do more support with local initiatives to allow them to do implementation planning, and that's something in Virginia that we haven't really done. And I think it may result in having some difficulty in us being able to implement it in the end because sometimes you don't have as much local buy-in to the process, and that goes into the public participation. So in the beginning, when we started with this program in 2001, the Section 319 program was the only pot of money for this. We had $2.5 million a year, and it was the only source to implement these plans. And over the years, over the last 15 years, that amount of money has dropped significantly, as well as other pots of money have been developed. And so with that ebb and flow of funding, it definitely impacts the motivation of who wants to participate. And we used to say if you participate in this implementation plan, we would be able to guarantee you to get funding to implement. Now with 88 plans, we just aren't able to do that. And so we have to be not only competitive in which TMDLs have implementation plans, and then we also are competitive in which implementation plans will actually get projects. And that has an impact. Why does someone want to participate in our implementation planning efforts if they don't know if they're actually going to get any funding for implementation? So it's something we're struggling with. We've worked through a couple mechanisms over the years to improve that. We have also had some issues with the fact that we've developed TMDLs, and then there's a lag time for when the implementation plan has been developed. And so sometimes with that lag time, data gets old, and so in developing the implementation plan, we have to go back and reassess, well, not reassess the data, but perhaps get more monitoring data. We have dabbled in doing what we call doing concurrent implementation planning and TMDL development. So essentially the last public meeting of our TMDL becomes the first public meeting to our TMDL implementation plan. And the idea is everyone is charged up because they have a TMDL, so they want to definitely implement it. And we struggled with some fatigue, meeting fatigue, and that type of thing. So we're looking at ways that we can be more effective and efficient through both the TMDL development and implementation planning process, so that where can there be more efficiencies? Can we do things at the same time, or can we do things concurrently or sequentially that will improve the process? Implementation monitoring has been a big issue. Our funding level for water quality monitoring in the state has received a lot of direct hits to the budget. And our implementation monitoring strategy it's 2 years on, 4 years off. It's in a 6-year cycle for the assessment window. Well, with implementation, that can be a problem. If a project is in the middle of implementation, but then there's no monitoring for 3 or 4 years, it's hard to see whether or not they're having an effect. And so as a result, we've developed some additional monitoring funding mechanisms to help to augment the traditional ambient monitoring processes, and we're still working with that. And I guess the last lesson learned that you would think that the implementation part, the projects at the end, wouldn't normally influence the way the implementation plans should be developed. But we found that if you kind of plan with the end in mind of how you want to implement it or what your mechanisms were, it helps you have a better plan in place. For example, we have some plans, especially ones that are dealing with urban areas, where the cities and the localities were able to provide pretty prescriptive lists of where they were going to do projects. Usually our plans are general. We don't identify specific land areas or specific locations a lat long or a point on a map that needs to be done, but we've or needs to have work done. But we've had some plans that we're able to be really specific, and those projects then, those implementation plans were able to translate into an implementation project fairly readily because they had projects already lined up and they could go and get funding. And so when possible, we are encouraging that more detailed information about on-the-ground situations to help prepare partners to going into implementation. And so at this point, and I'm not even sure what time we are, hopefully people are still on the line, here's our contact information, and feel free to, if you have any questions for either Ashley or myself, we're more than happy to answer them.
All right, thank you. We do have some questions. And so we might not get to all of these right now, but we will have time at the end of the webinar to get to more of them. So first question, how can you delist and not meet the water quality standard? You had indicated not meeting the standard 10.5% of the time could result in delisting, but the standard continues to be in compliance everywhere 100% of the time?
We have a two-part standard. So our standard is and Ashley, do you want to answer those?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're basically going to say the same thing, but yeah, basically the first is and maybe we just misstated it wrong, is what we would call the delisting goal, which is that 235 CFU per 100 mils with an exceedance rate of 10.5%. The TMDL itself is written to 0. So it's written to the geometric mean, which is actually lower. It's a value of 126 CFU. So it's a more stringent value with a 0% exceedance. So it's more stringent than actually getting the delisting, and so that's where that stage 1 versus stage 2 kind of comes into play. So hopefully that answers their question.
Okay, thanks. How do implementation plans go about determining the BMPs needed and the BMP goals needed to meet the TMDL pollutant reduction goal?
So in the TMDL, there's part of the development of the TMDL, there are scenarios that are in the modeling exercise that's done for the TMDL. They develop some scenarios, some basic scenarios. For example, I don't know if we can go to the slide where we talk about, we'll see if I can, where it says 100% of this needs to be done certain ways. It's okay. So the TMDL does provide scenarios, and so when they start the implementation planning, they're starting with those scenarios. There's model files usually. Oftentimes the contractor that did the TMDL is often the contractor that does the implementation plan. And so then various models are used during the implementation planning, HSPF, various types of models depending on the parameter of concern, or the pollutant of concern. And then through working with those stakeholder groups, the work groups. So for example, if we're talking about agriculture, the contractor in the implementation plan will probably produce a couple different scenarios, and then it'll be discussed with those various work groups, the residential or ag, and oftentimes what will happen is it may list, like say for example dairies were listed somehow was addressed in the TMDL, but then by the time we did the implementation plan, all of the users that are associated in the agricultural group say, you know what, we don't have any dairies anymore. The last dairy left a year and a half ago. We have no more dairies. So that kind of information is then incorporated by the contractor to develop additional scenarios. And as far as what types of BMPs, I think it's through the fact that we've had 17 years, we have different types of BMPs that we have utilized, different types of agricultural and residential septic ones, and then we have pollution reduction efficiencies, and so that is all incorporated to some modeling exercise to come up with which ones, which suite, you do 90 here, you do 50 here, and what is the ultimate result.
And there are some things that, let me go back to the chart here. Like you can see under milestone, I believe it's, one of the implementation milestones is the failing septic systems and straight pipes. Stuff like that is typically very consistent across implementation plans, such as straight pipes. Pretty much is always 100% needs to be addressed. So in some instances, certain BMPs are very consistent across all modeling scenarios, all implementation plans. So in that case, and we kind of, I think just over time have kind of come up with this short, commonly used list from our various program efforts that we're able to present to stakeholders. And if they want to change the amount, say there's no way we can get 100% livestock exclusion, we only want that to be 80, we say, okay, well then we have to come up with that 20% in some other BMP. So there's definitely the flexibility there.
Great, thanks. When you developed the Phase 1 BMP plan, did you expect it to get you to the goal? And how do you deal with stakeholders who invested in the BMPs, but the performance is not what they bought?
I'm just trying to find it right now. So I'm going to answer the latter part of the question probably first, because I think you can do that better, perhaps. So there has been a question, especially with bacteria, on whether or not our estimates are really true real world, because they're modeling estimates as far as like the BMP efficiencies and effectiveness. There have been studies. We have one of our partners that does a lot of our implementation planning is the Department of Biological Systems Engineering at Virginia Tech. And so they have done studies over the years to look at BMP effectiveness and efficiencies, and they've used that to help determine what BMPs they're recommending. And then we use those implementation plans as kind of a helps direct all of the rest of our implementation planning efforts. We haven't necessarily, our only indicator of whether or not a BMP is truly effective or the suite of BMPs implemented are truly effective is the water quality monitoring. We have done upstream, downstream of site-specific BMPs to look at, post and pre. We have funded a couple different projects at Virginia Tech on that, and some of that is really, it's very labor intensive because you have to look at the whole flow and everything, and that's why we've worked with Virginia Tech. Most of our traditional partners for implementation just don't have the financial or technical resources to do that type of studies. We have done some, and so, but we have part of, as far as whether or not a BMP that was planned on a farmer's property, whether or not it's effective, one of the things that we do look at is we have what we call a spot check program for our BMPs, where our partners are going into the field over a certain period of time to determine whether or not the issues that were originally identified for that particular site, that particular property, whether or not they were addressed. Anyone who's getting funding from us for a BMP are required to maintain that BMP for a certain number of years. And generally, those years are what is known as the efficiency or effective period for that BMP, and that period is what is usually used on our modeling efforts for the plan. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. So this goes back to your lessons learned slide. If a local initiative in a watershed is ready to move forward to develop an I-plan, and that doesn't fit into your statewide prioritized timeline for an agency-led process, do you tell the group that you're not ready?
That's a really good question, and it's not something that necessarily we have a written strategy for. We get this question all the time because the funding we have available, we can only fund it if they have approved implementation plans. And so someone who's interested in doing a project will look on our list of approved plans and they say, we're not on there, we want a plan, and then we have to refer them to another process. And I think that's something that we probably need to improve in how local organizations who have identified an issue, where that fits in the larger scheme of things. Now, granted, our implementation, our 319 funding is one small pot. There's a lot of other pots available through the state of Virginia that don't require this implementation plan, so they can still have access to different pots of funding for implementation, regardless of whether or not they have an implementation plan. And we do usually encourage them. A lot of our partners, especially if it's identified as having septic issues, we have a lot of different partners throughout the state that are doing issues to address straight cuts and failing and failed septic systems, and we usually will refer them to that. We also, because of the Chesapeake Bay initiative, there's a lot of groups that are doing implementation for the Chesapeake Bay, and there is the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Implementation Plan, which is a larger plan, basically a plan that addressed 5 states and 60% of Virginia. And currently our local implementation efforts don't recognize that larger plan to make funding eligibility, but we're looking to seeing whether or not just having that larger Chesapeake, having a locality within that that's addressed by that larger implementation plan could make someone eligible for funding.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that's, I think, something that we internally are looking at as making a higher priority than maybe we have in the past, because I believe I referenced earlier we are in the process of reevaluating how we prioritize our implementation plans, and that has definitely been a concern that has been expressed to us by some entities and our own regional offices. And so that's probably something that we are going to be building into how we determine where we go next, more so into the future. Because as many other programs know, the funding is just getting smaller, and so it's just getting more competitive. So we have to make sure that we're able to keep up with and be able to put our limited funding where it's best going to be served.
All right, thank you. And thanks for your presentation. We are now going to move over to Jayshika and Bryan for their presentation on the Coquille project. Any questions we didn't get to now, there will be another chance to after the end of this next presentation. So Jayshika and Bryan, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Jasper. Hello and welcome to our presentation on the Coquille River Watershed TMDL mapping tool. I am Jayshika Ramrakha.
Do you mind speaking up a little bit? Sorry, do you mind speaking up a little bit?
Sure, I'm sorry about that. Hello and welcome to our presentation on the Coquille River Watershed TMDL mapping tool. I am Jayshika Ramrakha, Watershed Stormwater Coordinator at EPA Region 10, and I will be co-presenting with Bryan Duggan, Basin Specialist at Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. Here is an overview of our presentation and what it will cover. As you will hear during our presentation, EPA and ODEQ designed a GIS tool to assist in implementation of the Coquille River Subbasin TMDL. This tool is helpful with implementation because it helps users understand areas that need to be improved and spend resources there. The Coquille River Watershed is located in southwestern Oregon in Coos County. It drains over 1,000 square miles into the Pacific Ocean. Major tributaries of the main stem Coquille River are the North Fork, South Fork, and Middle Fork. This is an important watershed because 4 anadromous salmonoid species occur within the subbasin. Those 4 salmonoid species are coastal, cutthroat, chinook, coho, steelhead. Coho is also classified as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. The original natural estuarine environments have been altered by the community's dependence on wetlands and estuarine resources and the need for flat, dry land. Surveys that were conducted in the late 1800s described extensive marshes and wetlands that were diked, drained, and converted to fertile agricultural lands. Diking, draining, and filling of marshes began in the 1870s to create the present city of Coos Bay, expand rail and road routes, and to accommodate more ranches and homes. In 1970, when only 15% of the original marsh area remained, state and federal laws then slowed the conversion process. So in the next slide, we will discuss how settlement near this watershed changed the way that land was managed.
Hi there. So as you've heard, game-changing impacts to the Coquille River riparian habitats began soon after white settlement of the valley began in the middle to late 19th century. Riparian trees were often the first trees that were harvested in order to facilitate fuel for steam engines, access to riverbanks for log transportation and splash dams, as well as to make way for agricultural grazing. Splash damming was a common method of log transport in western Oregon from the 1880s through the 1950s. Methods included storing fresh-cut logs directly within the active stream channel, creating reservoirs, and then releasing these log-laden floodwaters for transport to mills downstream. As you can imagine, this created quite a bit of an impact to our stream ecologies. Such impacts included increased amounts of exposed bedrock as those frequent freshets going downstream scoured the stream basins down to the bedrock. We've also had decreased amounts of spawning gravel for salmon, reduced abundances of large wood, as often a lot of these projects involved stream cleaning downstream of splash damming, removing obstacles. That included natural log jams. And then, of course, a legacy of reduced riparian complexity as riparian stream banks were harvested for the above reasons. So removing riparian vegetation from the stream sides had the added effect of increasing thermal loading to our rivers and streams in western Oregon. Many man-made and natural factors influence stream temperature, but by reducing the shade, by removing these riparian vegetation, is just one of the activities that can contribute to our stream warming. So moving forward, past assessments for the Coquille River watershed shows that we are not meeting our salmon rearing and migration, spawning water temperature, and dissolved oxygen water quality standards. Maintaining adequate cool water temperature is necessary to support the coho salmonid use within the Coquille River. Elevated water temperatures also contribute directly to dissolved oxygen impairments. As you know, the solubility of oxygen decreases as water temperature increases. So Oregon DEQ is taking a multi-parameter TMDL approach for the Coquille watershed. Our parameters of interest include dissolved oxygen, bacteria, chlorophyll A, iron, pH, and temperature. A temperature TMDL is not currently in development due to ongoing litigation on the Oregon temperature water quality criteria. The dissolved oxygen TMDL includes a cumulative effects analysis on temperature. A cumulative effects analysis looks at the impacts on the environment which results from incremental actions when added to other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions. So the DEQ rule says we could either do a TMDL or we can do a cumulative effects analysis. And so this shade tool is a valuable tool for implementing a cumulative effects analysis for temperature and our DO management approach. The tool shows current loading from past practices and the potential for future loading with treatment. Most models, as you may know, are mostly limited to main stem attainment scenarios. This shade tool is unique in that it includes data from smaller tributaries within the Coquille subbasin, which will provide some of the greatest coverage Oregon DEQ has to date for shade potential within a major watershed.
So to address elevated stream temperatures, EPA and ODEQ designed a GIS tool to display shade and habitat-related GIS data for the Coquille River Watershed. This tool is intended to be used by stakeholders to query and display layers and support the identification of high-value implementation locations. Before going further into the tool description, I wanted to acknowledge that we understand that many states do not list for temperature and that this tool is developed to help address stream temperatures. However, even if a state does not list for temperature, this tool can still be useful to address low DO, nutrient, and biohabitat-related impairments as well. And that's because we know that the rate of chemical reaction increases with increasing water temperatures, and elevated temperatures are known to interfere with the metabolism, the metabolic growth rate, and reproduction. Therefore, it's important to address elevated temperatures first, even for other impairments as well. Okay, so now back to the tool. This tool is designed to assist implementers in improving vegetated buffers or riparian areas along the Coquille River. The tool allows users to identify those high-priority riparian sites and ensure enhancements are made in areas where they will improve water quality. This tool is cool because it shows users the amount of light and heat the sun delivers under existing riparian conditions and how much light and heat an improved riparian area could block. It provides fish distribution information for multiple fish species, and those using the tool can find areas where the potential to improve both water quality and fish habitat is high. As you have heard earlier, the Coquille River coho salmon are identified as Threatened and Endangered Species Act, and this tool is especially useful because it allows stakeholders to improve protection for threatened and endangered species and the dependent water bodies. It can help identify those areas where threatened and endangered species are listed and assist in implementing the Clean Water Act by making it easy to protect ecosystems of threatened and endangered species and support the recovery and habitats that support them. The recovery plan for this fish species emphasizes the importance of healthy riparian areas because they provide shade and maintain cool water temperatures for fish. Although riparian plantings take a long time to mature, this tool allows users to preview the potential for improving stream shade over time and provides a unique opportunity to track progress toward improving water quality in the Coquille River. Now, Bryan will do a short demonstration of the GIS tool and show you how it works.
Okay, so just to be aware, that link on the previous slide will take you to the tool at the DEQ TMDL webpage. There is also there a link for a user guide that will allow you to step-by-step process through how to utilize the tool and how to identify components of the tool. Tool inputs and then other quick tips on the tool. There are some pop-ups that are enabled for many operational layers as a default, so often you might have to go in there and choose the particular layers of your interest. And then some queries may fail, and that is most likely because the extent of your map might be too large of a grab sample for the tool to process in a timely manner. So just zoom in and create a sub-selection for a more quicker result. So the tool inputs were provided by the local Coquille Watershed Council with DEQ support, and they included riparian condition and shade model and asset assessments from the main stem Coquille, North Fork Coquille, which includes the East Fork and the Upper East Fork Coquille, Middle Fork Coquille, and the South Fork Coquille shade models. And then the DEQ webpage also has links to these assessment reports as well. The outputs leveraged by the mapping tool are current shade and potential shade for each model reach based on potential riparian area restoration efforts as input into each of the area-specific shade models. These two values were used to estimate current and potential thermal loading for each of the reaches. Magnitude and percent change in thermal loads from current to potential thermal loads was also calculated to allow additional query functions in this mapping tool. It's important to note here that the North Fork and Upper East Fork shade model data provided did not have a potential shade value, so they don't have a potential thermal loading value or within the tool itself. The different shade model outputs were combined and assigned to line features covering most of the major waterways within the Coquille River Watershed. All these different model outputs were combined into one consistent line coverage for use within the mapping tool. So now I'm going to talk about some of the operational layers within the tool. First, we have the Oregon coho distribution. Of course, the coho being listed as threatened on the Endangered Species Act, they have a particular concern here. Then we also have a shade model layer, and that includes the model extent, indicates where existing and site potential shade model and has been completed. Model's percent change, color-coded ranges of percent change expected between existing and future site potential shade. Modeled potential loading BTUs, color-coded British thermal units ranges under site potential mature vegetation conditions, and current loading BTU, color-coded BTU ranges under existing site vegetation conditions. BTUs were selected to quantify the amount of heat energy provided by the sun. On any given day in late July, approximately 2,400 BTUs strikes the water surface within the vicinity of the Coquille watershed. Shade model looks at how much of this energy is being blocked by shade under current vegetative conditions, and how much of the sun's energy would be blocked under site potential conditions with treatment. So as we know, this tool can quantify thermal pollutant load changes with treatment. So characterizing activities in terms of pollutant load reductions helps measure progress, as we said, within implementation of TMDLs. That is being made toward reducing stream temperatures and will help us track the TMDL implementation. For example, if we improved an existing reach riparian conditions from 25% to 50%, then the pollutant loads are reduced by the differences between the two. For the example here, percent shade of 25% compared to an improvement to 50% will net a 610 BTU load reduction. Moving on to the additional operational layers within the tool. These can be found on the layers on the right-hand side of the tool. These layers include auxiliary layers, allowing for consideration of the potential for multiple benefits that may be realized from site treatment. These include a hydrography layer subgroup, an intrinsic potential coho salmon layer group, and that's indicating the highest intrinsic potential of coho habitat, a water quality limited layer, water quality impairments, and then a watershed restoration inventory, evaluating the proximity of other restoration activities within any given reach. Moving on to user guidance. These are some of the graphics you'll find within the user guidance and to help you navigate around the tool. Looking at the top right, buttons allow for the selection of layers, legend, map base, and the About tab. The layer list will show the operational layers that we just discussed, or group layers available for display and analysis. The map legend provides color codes or symbology for the operational layers currently displayed on the map, as well as outputs of any query tool runs. The base map gallery allows you to select backdrop for the operational layers. Selections include a topography layer, terrain, and aerial photography. And the About tab is simply a summary of the map and tool's purpose and functionality. Now back to other additional operational layers. We're going to move to the left side of the screen, and we have those 4 boxes there. The first one is the identity tool. The identity tool allows for the location selection using a point or sub-selected polygon, and will provide information on the reach ID and the default layers. The measuring tool allows you to measure area, river miles, and identification of latitude and longitude by pointing, using the tool and pointing to particular reaches. And then there's the swipe tool. The swipe tool allows the user to select one operational layer or query output layer to have it disappear as the line within the box slides up and down the screen. This is more of a kind of a useful visual tool to compare results between layers. The last operational button there is the query tasks. The query tasks are the meat and potatoes of the tool. This is where you'll identify the tasks that you would like to query, and you'll get your results from. And this query allows for 4 tasks to be searched. There's the intrinsic coho potential, again habitat, StreamNet coho, which is another coho layer for coho activity, shade model current thermal loading, and then the shade model current loading and BTU change with treatment. Moving on to the queries, talking about StreamNet coho salmon. StreamNet is a data set record for fish distribution and activity of coho salmon. And this query only allows you for querying based on the spatial filters, extensive map or sub-selection that is designed to join load reductions with coho benefits. This includes the option of using features within the results, such as outputs from another or different query task. And so that would be the first query that you could choose. The other 3 queries allow the user to perform more of a 2-step query if desired. The first step, the user can select a subset of records based on specific attributes of the shade models layer or the intrinsic potential layer, depending on which query is initially selected. For example, if you wanted to search for thermal load reductions greater than 500 BTUs, you could input that within the attributes criteria there, or a range of BTUs that you were interested in. And again, that would then give you results for a particular reach or the extent of map that the screen is showing you. As part of the second step, spatial filters can also be applied using one of the following spatial mechanisms. Again, the extent of map, or using a particular boundary or sub-selection. Now, moving on to results. Again, this would be from your query box. You see that you have the task and the results there. And once you've selected a task and you've gone through your query, you'll then come up with your results. Here are the results output of the tool, and it will show you the quantified load reductions for solar input from riparian treatment for either selected reaches or, again, the map extent. Now, query outputs can be exported or saved as a CSV file format and then opened in Microsoft Excel from the results box there, as you see, or from the attribute table, which is down in the bottom of the tool screen there. You see a small dark rectangular box. By clicking that, you will then pull up an attribute screen of the data being represented by the map. And from there, you could download or save or export the information to a file. Also up in the results there, you see 3 little dots to the right of the query, and that allows you to delete your results. And by removing this result option, under there, you can clear your results there so you're not compounding the tool with multiple results at a time. So at this point, once you've had a query come up, it's important to play around with the different layer lists on the right, turning them on and off to see where the model percent change or current loading layers are, or turning off fish distribution so you can see clearly where the changes are occurring within the reach of your interest. You know, at this point, when you have a query done, it's important to just play around with these layers, and then you could get different interpretations of the data there. We are pretty excited for this tool, and we're looking forward to expanding its reach even further within other local watersheds in the south coast of Oregon. We already have detailed riparian and shade assessments for the Shetco and Six's Fourth Field Huckett watersheds that are a bit further south from the Coquille River. We're looking to expand this tool utilizing those shade assessments as well there. So that concludes my presentation of the use of the tool.
Thanks, Bryan. A great thing about this tool is that landowners with very minimal computer skills can use this tool as well, and it enables one to self-evaluate and pick high priority areas and help spend limited resources wisely. And it's designed to work for a wide variety of users who may want to improve stream and riparian conditions at a state, federal, county, city level, and even on an individual level. It really does help facilitate implementation discussions with other stakeholders as well. And as Bryan mentioned, DEQ plans to implement this tool by providing a series of webinars and training to stakeholders or those that are implementing stream enhancements or restoration activities. We will now open our presentation up for questions, and if we run out of time, our contact information is listed in the next slide. Thank you so much for attending this presentation. Questions?
Thank you.
Thanks. We actually, at this point, we have one question so far. About how much money did it cost to develop the mapping tool?
I'll let Jayshika mention that, because we did utilize a EPA support from that.
Right. I believe it was about $20,000. And this is approximately $20,000 of contracting money.
All right, thanks. Has the use of this tool by stakeholder groups directly resulted in any impairment delistings or 319 non-point source success stories?
Hi, this is Bryan. Yeah, I can answer that. Actually, this is one of the first presentations of this tool. We've really yet to roll it out. This summer, I have plans to bring in this presentation and others like it to stakeholders locally. And as of right now, other than word of mouth that we have this coming out and that it's on the website, I've yet to get it into the hands of those who I think would utilize it for the most good. So if we got together and talked about this from a year from now, I would hope that that answer would change.
Okay, thanks. Now I have a question for Ashley and Nicole. What BMPs do you use for wildlife?
The interesting thing about wildlife is that when we're developing our implementation plans, they're dealing with pretty much anthropogenic causes. So most of our implementation plans do not actually address if there is a wildlife load, and we kind of do it through adaptive management in the sense that if everything has, all the anthropogenic causes are addressed, so everything that's listed in the implementation plan is addressed and we're still not meeting the standards, then we can go back and look, and it might be a use of payment type of situations. So we do not have any BMP specifically to address wildlife.
Okay, thanks. And then for whoever wants to answer, do you have any need for a tool that evaluates thermal non-point source pollution?
So I'm sorry, was that towards us? I didn't hear that.
That's for both, so whoever wants to take it can.
But can you repeat the question?
Do you have any need for a tool that evaluates thermal non-point source pollution?
I think that was from Fred, who's our Region 3, and I think that was directed to Ashley and I.
Okay.
He sent that to us privately as well, so he might not have realized he sent it to the whole group. We don't have a temperature standard, so we don't.
So yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like a useful tool, and, you know, habitat and shades, and we have a lot of BO impairments, which, you know, that alternatively also helps with DO issues, and so it definitely could be something that we could use or evaluate, but we don't have the temperature standards that states like Oregon and Washington have.
Okay. Any other questions out there? Now's really the last chance to get them in. There will also be room for questions on the exit survey, which I will then, I guess, relay to the speakers after the webinar, but maybe give it another 30 seconds for people to enter any questions they have right now. And while that's going on, I'll also just stress that it's very important and very helpful for everyone to take the survey once they exit the webinar. That really helps us gauge how we're doing with this series, and we use your feedback in planning upcoming webinars. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions, so that's all we have for today. Thank you very much to all of our speakers, 2 really great presentations, and thank you to everyone who joined us. Our next webinar in the series is not scheduled yet, but it will be taking place sometime in September, and it will be focusing on TMDL reporting and tracking. So please be on the lookout for that. We will send out an official announcement once we have a date scheduled. But to everyone today, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.